Bijlandt's troops were actually on the front slope before the actual French artillery opened fire at 11:30. Around about 12, they were certainly moved back over the crestline ridge. Over the last 10 years, myself and a couple of others have actually spent our times going on the archives trying to find new material. Between us all, we have actually brought over 500 new accounts of the Battle of Waterloo into the general domain. Now, when I tell you that the history of it for the last 190 years has been written on about 250 versions, we now have 750, you can imagine the amount of change that has brought to our understanding of the battle. Mercer's claims, right, okay, we all know Alexander Mercer. I'm sure if anybody's read about Waterloo, you'll have read his stories. Now, I say stories, that's unfair. Everything he says in his book, I can corroborate, as in every death, every wounding of one of his soldiers. What I can't corroborate is his greater claims, that his battery takes huge losses in horses and men, that he is fired on from his flank by a Prussian unit. These claims, to be honest, can be demolished very quickly. When I went into the archives and looked at the returns for his regiment, where he was saying, what was it, 140 horses, and for example, I can only find about 70 horses wounded. Now, it's still a large number, but to be honest, it's not 140, it would be virtually his whole troop. And I think there is a definite statement to the fact that, that what he was trying to do is Mercer had a problem. Mercer felt that he came out of the battle, although he ended up with a troop out of the battle, because although he commanded a troop at the battle, he was commanding it for another officer that wasn't there. He got his own troop after the battle. He didn't feel that was enough. He actually felt, for the rest of his for his military career, that he had been ignored and he hadn't been rewarded properly. His book has to be read in that regard, where he puts forward his case for the fact that he did so much of the battle and, oh, look at me, I never got anything for it. So you have to read it in that sense. And I will mention one other thing more with that. I said the Prussian battery. He then marked it on the maps, and I have a copy of his map he drew for William Siborne, and it is extremely 100% clear there was a French Guard battery. So the only question mark is did he invent the Black Hussar that actually came up and started going, what are you doing to my German friends and all this? Or, was that somebody that just appeared and got it completely wrong? I don't know. I can't prove either way, but all I can say is Mercer is honest in his general statements of what went on that day, but do read it with a little bit of knowing the man was trying to sell himself afterwards. Okay, this is relatively straightforward to mention, to be honest now. It's actually what I think has really been, well, I say it's really been actually destroyed. I then watched Sean Bean on Waterloo on Sunday night to watch him actually say the same thing again, which is actually literally every historian has destroyed now. Bijlandt's troops were actually on the front slope before the actual French artillery opened fire at 11:30. Around about 12, they were certainly moved back over the crestline ridge and did not suffer any more than any of the other Allied troops during the barrage that then went on for the next hour or so before D'Erlon's troops advanced. Yes, they then did break, or at least some of them broke. If you look at it closely, the troops that were nearest La Haissant actually seem to have broken, and the troops further across behind the Scottish regiment actually seem to have, in front of the Scottish regiment, actually seem to have held their ground for a lot longer and didn't give in immediately. But certainly, all the books you've read for many years, in my case for 40 years, where they have said that Bijlandt's troops stayed on that front slope and actually got hammered before, in the early stages of the battle, are simply wrong. I'll leave it at that. Okay, yes, yeah. Victor Hugo you'll find, if you actually read any of my work or listen to one of my other lectures, that Victor Hugo and I are not great friends, actually, because Victor Hugo is probably responsible for more myths regarding the battle than anybody else in history alone, even more than Napoleon, can I put it that way. He actually went to Hougoumont farm. He spoke to the farmers, and as part of his history, which he put into his book, Les Miserables, where he put about 100 pages of actually history of the Battle of Waterloo, which he had got from farmers who hadn't been at the battle, and actually this is now 50 years later, so his impeccable sources, should we say. But they actually mentioned that the gardener Van Kutsen, who actually was the man who was running Hougoumont farm as a farm at that stage, that there's a story that a young girl was actually still within the actual farm when the family left. Now, this is strange for start off. Mum and Dad and the rest of the kids go, the 5-year-old stays. Now, apparently, she supposedly then was escorted out to the farm a few hours into the battle by a sergeant that was wounded, and he went back up the hill with her and took it into safety. And she met her family in the woods. Now, this lady was actually brought in 1880, at the age of 70, to Britain, and was actually fated as being a heroine of the battle, etc., etc. So she had a damn good time, to be honest. But when we've actually looked into the records, Van Kutsen hadn't married in 1815, and I know you can still get illegitimate children, but the first child he is recorded as having, a son, was actually in 1817. So we actually think now that this lady that came to England in the 1880s was actually somebody that had just made a living out of making up a story. And unfortunately, there were many that did that at the battlefield of Waterloo for the rest of their lives.